Hello. Thank you for coming. This is the More Than Laissez-Faire audiobook, episode number 4. Thank you so much for coming. I'm so glad you're here. And so today's going to be a fairly exciting audiobook, although they're all exciting as far as I'm concerned. But this one is going to go into the model. So I'll show you what we're doing here. Chapter 2. We're going to do Chapter 2, which covers the divine economy model. And there's 3 sections that we're going to look at today. The code, the conceptual model, and the two-dimensional model. And this is Chapter 2 in More Than Laissez-Faire. I want to welcome you to this divine economy theory fireside and to thank you for taking your time to be here with me. This Facebook Live series serves as an audiobook. Every once in a while, I will host a mini webinar to talk in more depth about the diagrams or any general questions that come up during the audiobook episodes. This Facebook Live series also serves as an archival resource, since I am the author and originator of the divine economy theory, and I am the one reading the book. And finally, this Facebook Live series is a love story. It is a story about love of the divine economy theory, the love of freedom, the love of peace and prosperity, and the love of voluntary social cooperation. Let's get started. Today's fireside is Chapter 2. The title of Chapter 2 is Divine Economy Model. We're going to be looking at 3 sections: the code, the conceptual model, the two-dimensional model. I think you'll find this model building experience very interesting. Once we get started, after each paragraph, I'll ask for your comments. Let's see who's here. Okay, so anybody here yet? Nobody's here yet. Okay, that's all right. So let's see what kind of links there are on this Facebook page that you can go to different places if you have certain interests. It'll take you there. And apologize on that. So on the Facebook Live page, there should be some links here. What we got? Okay, see more. Okay, so there we go. There's the episode number. There's the some of the information about today's episode. There's a link to the More Than Laissez-Faire on Amazon. There's a way to get to a notification for the Facebook Live each time. There's a link that takes you to a PDF of the workbook that accompanies this book. And then there's the email addresses that you can reach me. If you want to send me an email, that'd be great. And so if you come on to this Facebook Live and you have any comments, you can just enter them there on that Facebook Live page, and I'll be checking back and welcoming you if you come. And then if your questions are a little bit off the subject of today's talk, I'll just bring them up at another time at a special mini webinar to address those in more detail. Same with the diagrams. I'll go into more detail on the diagrams later on. So let's see where we're going now. So we'll see if anybody's come to the Facebook Live page. All right, where are we here? No comments. Okay, so we'll take the next step. So the next step is then to go to the audiobooks and begin on reading from the audiobooks. So here we are, Chapter 2, Divine Economy Model. It's organic and subjective and splendid. Our journey has now brought us face to face with another life force. Unlike the fire encountered in the forest, this life force is organic and subjective. Yet it is similar to the fire since it too is splendid. It is organic because of its symmetry and reciprocity and because it manifests the characteristics of life. Its life-likeness is directly attributable to its DNA and its RNA, that is, to its foundation and its operation, which rest upon subjectivism. From this subjective nature, we see what can fittingly be described as dynamic splendor. So we're going to go look at some of the highlighted points that I made, and I just want to check and make sure, okay, it's doing what it's supposed to do, so that's good. Again, the title of the chapter is Divine Economy Model, which is subjective. I don't know if many of you have ever experienced a subjective model before, but that's what you're going to see going into this chapter. So the preface, some of the highlights of that is that we're going to experience symmetry and reciprocity. And this model has a foundation and it has an operation involved in it, and all of those rest upon subjectivism. So we will now go to the second section of this chapter, which is actually called the Code, and we'll read about that. Shortly, I will begin to present to you a graphical representation of the Divine Economy Model. But before we begin examining the model, we will want to understand the conceptual basis of what is called the Cartesian coordinate system. In mathematics, the application of the two-dimensional coordinate system and the three-dimensional coordinate system appear to be very empirical. Despite being used mostly for empirical work, the Cartesian coordinate system is not restricted from more conceptual applications, as proven when it is expanded to higher dimensions. For example, the fourth dimension, the fifth dimension, or even to the nth degrees of freedom. This section, we're going to review it, looking at some of the highlights that I made on this paragraph in this section. This section is called the Code, and what we will look at, the model is built using the Cartesian coordinate system, and it, even though it's used empirically, it has more conceptual applications, taking it even to the nth degrees of freedom. So we are about to go to the next paragraph. I take advantage of the conceptual potentialities of the Cartesian coordinate system and use it as a part of the design of my subjective model. Just as the higher dimensions are abstract, I make all of the dimensions of my model abstract. Referring to the Cartesian coordinate system, Bernhard Riemann in 1854 described the value of this abstraction. Abstract studies such as these allow one to observe relationships without being limited by narrow terms, and prevent traditional prejudices from inhibiting one's progress. In my model, the two-dimensional system is subjective, or abstract, as is the third dimension, and the fourth dimension, and the fifth dimension. In other words, my model is five-dimensional. So here are the highlights that I selected for this paragraph. So I use the Cartesian coordinate system as part of the design of my subjective model. And all of the dimensions of my model are abstract. And the abstract studies enable us to observe relationships and prevent traditional prejudices from inhibiting one's progress. So my model, all the dimensions are abstract, and in my model there is 5 dimensions. My model is 5-dimensional. Actually, we're now moving into the next section. And so I want to show you this. This was the layout for today's audiobook reading. Episode number 4. We're doing chapter 2. We're doing part of chapter 2. The sections that we're covering are the code, the conceptual model, and the 2-dimensional model. So we've talked about the code, and now we're going into the conceptual model. The conceptual model. Now I will introduce the divine economy model to you. As the model is presented, its interconnectedness, reciprocity, and symmetry will be discussed. One analogy that may prove useful is that of a complex organism made up of components that are more or less differentiated. Ourselves, we are made up of systems and organs and tissues and cells. Likewise, the divine economy model has universal laws, foundational elements, concepts, and principles. So here are the points that I highlighted for that paragraph. First of all, we're into the new section called the conceptual model. One analogy that may prove useful is that of a complex organism made up of components that are more or less differentiated. The divine economy model has universal laws, foundational elements, concepts, and principles. I'm going to get a drink here. My mouth is getting dry. From my Ludwig von Mises.org cup. I was hoping someone would come so I could greet them. But we'll just move on to the next section. Okay, so the center of the model is its reality and essence, summed up using the words divine economy. These 2 powerful words clearly state the vital perspective of this model. These 2 words efficiently convey the source and the dominion. The implication here is far more magnificent than laissez-faire, which merely suggests not to meddle. The implication here is that the economy is above and beyond our human understanding, and that it can be and is corrupted by human intervention alone. Okay, so these are the points that I've highlighted for that chapter. The center of the model is its reality and essence. And those words, divine economy, convey the source and the dominion. And that implies that it's far more magnificent than laissez-faire, because the economy is above and beyond our human understanding. The divine economy is both pervasive and subtle, and its dominion reaches everyone in their daily affairs. It is basic and connected to the necessary acts of every man and woman, and by its conveyance of information, it allows people to function. So here are the highlighted points for that paragraph. Its dominion reaches everyone in their daily affairs, and by its conveyance of information, it allows people to function. Oh, David Henderson's here. Thank you so much for coming. So, David, if you wish to, go ahead and put some comments in as we go along. And if nothing else, you can just tell us where you're from. I'd like to just reiterate the fact that I am so happy that you're here, and then we'll continue in a second. I'll check back to see if you had any comment. So we're going to then start the final section that we're going to talk about today in episode 4 of More Than Laissez-Faire, chapter 2. And so let me give you a clue on that. So, chapter 2, Divine Economy Model, we are at the two-dimensional model. That's the section we're going to talk about. We've covered the code, we've covered the conceptual model, and now we're going to go into the two-dimensional model. Just as there are 4 cardinal directions, a north and south and east and west, the organic divine economy model has 4 petals. Gleaned from the knowledge and insight of many great thinkers, I chose the following petals for the model: human spirit, transformation, law, and order. What we have is the model in its simplest form if you look at diagram 2A. This is the anatomy of the divine economy. We have human spirit, transformation, law, and order. Those are the components of the divine economy. That's how it functions. So we'll go ahead and look at the highlighted points here. We are now in the 3rd section of today's episode, and this is called the two-dimensional model, and that's what we're going to look at. This organic divine economy model has 4 petals: human spirit, transformation, law, and order. And the model that you're about to look at in diagram 2A is the model in its simplest form. So there it is. The divine economy model, human spirit, transformation, law, and order. So what I'd like to do now, so I think we can then go to the next section. See how that's going. Okay. That one, okay. And then we're moving past this diagram 2A. There's 2B, but let's see what it says. To the model, we then add reciprocity and symmetry, which is diagram 2B, called the skeletal structure of the divine economy. From now on, you will notice arrows on both ends of the lines to represent reciprocity and symmetry. The element of reciprocity adds the dimension of mutual exchange. Another way to describe what happens during an exchange is to see exchange as the fulfillment of the double inequality of wants. I want what you have more than what I have, and you reciprocate those feelings, therefore we exchange. So these are some of the points that I'd like to show you at this point in the book. So we have diagram 2B, and you notice these arrows on both sides. And by adding that, it represents reciprocity and symmetry. So reciprocity adds the dimension of mutual exchange. And the reason there's exchange anytime is because there's a double inequality of wants. It's not an issue of equal. It's like you're not doing it because the value is equal. There's an inequality of wants on both sides, and so that's the only reason exchange takes place. So, to the next paragraph. Okay, so proportionality and relativity manifest themselves in the world via the element of symmetry. For example, as transformation within the economy increases, the other vital elements of the economy also increase, and the economy as a whole increases. Now, the model now becomes what is seen in diagram 2B. So we've got the reciprocity and symmetry incorporated into the model. See what kind of comments I have for that paragraph. Okay, so proportionality and relativity manifest themselves in the world via the element of symmetry, which means that as one thing changes, the whole thing changes. So as transformation takes place, increases in the economy, the whole economy increases then. The next section. In this form, the functionality of the model begins to emerge. It has a dynamic nature. Every point is relative to every other point, and every understanding gained causes movement, advancing civilization. So for that paragraph, we're talking about the functionality, and it begins to be clear how it functions. Every point is relative to every other point, and every understanding gained causes movement, advancing civilization. So to continue to improve the functionality of the model, more scientific elements of the economy are added. These economic elements were discovered by great thinkers in the tradition of classical liberalism. These certain points of focus are added to the skeletal structure as intermediary potencies. So we're adding more scientific elements to the model. And these points of focus are intermediary potencies. To the skeleton, we add more substance by making the model more realistic and bringing it to life. To the human spirit appendage, we add action, purposeful action. To the transformation appendage, we add capital structure. The law appendage fills out nicely with property rights, and it is the market that beefs up the the order appendage. We're seeing the organic nature of this model. So highlights for this paragraph. We want to make the model more realistic and bring it to life. So we add action, we add capital structure, we add property rights, and the market beefs up the order appendage. Here's the next paragraph. With this added substance as shown in diagram 2C, so there we go, there's 2C. It begins to become evident to us how the model neatly incorporates the intermediary elements that make it operational. Using the analogies of a skeletal structure and appendages reminds us about the organic nature of the model. So these are the highlights for that paragraph. It introduces you to diagram 2C, which is the modus operandi of the divine economy. Once they're added, we see how those intermediary potencies neatly incorporate the elements that make it operational. And by beefing up those appendages, we see the organic nature. It reminds us of the organic nature of the model. This is the highest form of the two-dimensional model, and this is where the model begins to become complex. We will have to take a step back and examine more deeply the foundational components. Then the extremely potent intermediary elements will need to be explored. So this is the highlight of this paragraph, is that this is the highest form of the two-dimensional model. And we have to then, now that we see what it looks like right here, this is what it looks like, the modus operandi of the divine economy. We have to now go in and understand each of these, plus the intermediary potencies, before we move past this two-dimensional model. But just looking at it, you can see how it's beginning to become very complex. It's just the two-dimensional model. Going back to the skeletal structure of the divine economy in diagram 2B, which goes way back here, 2B. That's the skeletal structure. But we can kind of cheat a little bit and look at it with some of the extra components. Going back to the skeletal structure of the divine economy in diagram 2B, it is easy to see how interactive and cumulatively interactive it is. The human being has a nature that is subject to illumination. It is the human spirit that reflects reality. Transformation is the illumination that takes place, and this all comes about because we encounter the human spirit of others, directly or indirectly. The world is not a vacuum. People learn from others and from their environment. So these are the points that I highlight in that paragraph. Diagram 2b shows us how interactive and cumulatively interactive it is. Those arrows, see? The human being has a nature that is subject to illumination. The human spirit reflects that reality. Transformation is the illumination that takes place. And this all happens because people learn from others and from their environment. The world has structure, and incorporating structure into our lives creates order. Transformation is furthered by discovering the operational laws of that order. Completing the circle, then, the human spirit is illumined by the transformation that has taken place. So, what I highlighted on that paragraph is that incorporating structure into our lives creates order. And transformation is furthered by discovering the operational laws of that order. So we've got structure, and that is part of the order. We've got laws that are part of that order. And that the human spirit is illumined by the transformation that takes place. So this is a circle in that sense, that everything's there's a dynamic nature to all of this. It's always ongoing and dynamic and transformative. The dynamic interaction of all of these interrelated elements is certain. Already it is clear that the complexity of the divine economy is mind-boggling. We have to trust in its divine nature and content ourselves with understanding bits and pieces, ever humbled by the infinite greatness of the divine economy. So points of emphasis here is we're beginning to see the dynamic interactions and the complexity, and that there's no way humans could understand this. It's mind-boggling. All it requires, though, in essence, is being humbled by the infinite greatness of the divine economy. Now moving on to the more complex model in diagram 2C. The modus operandi of the divine economy, we need to spend some time educating and re-educating ourselves about the intermediary elements. It would be inaccurate and naive to pretend that there is a common understanding of these four elements in the economic literature or in the minds of most readers. So we're going to go to the more complex model in 2C, which is the modus operandi of the divine economy. But these intermediary elements that are added to that part, we have to educate ourselves or re-educate ourselves about them. The four scientific elements that make up the modus operandi of the divine economy are property rights, human action, the market, and capital structure. These are potent forces which universally permeate human life on this planet. These are the highlights. There's 4 scientific elements added at this point to the model: property rights, human action, the market, and capital structure. And these potent forces universally permeate human life. Placement of these intermediate elements into the model relative to the initial foundational components expands the foundation of the model. The model readily accommodates the fluid manner in which these 8 elements all juxtapose themselves. So we're going to look at the highlights. There's a placement that took place of these intermediate elements into the model, and that expands the foundation of the model. And it shows and demonstrates and is easy to understand that there's this fluid manner in which all these 8 elements all juxtapose themselves. There's this dynamic interaction that's taking place. Property rights interface closely with human action, the market, and the capital structure. Property rights are truly foundational and have a strong connection to law in the divine economy, since they anchor the economy to the human being. In its most basic and primary expression, property rights are human rights. The existence of human beings grants dominion, and its peaceful expansion towards food, clothing, and higher attainments all fall within the domain of property rights. So here are the highlighted points of that paragraph. Property rights anchor the economy to the human being. Property rights are human rights. And all actions that take on any kind of fruit fall within the domain of property rights. Okay, the human spirit, each one of us is the human spirit, each one of us as a unique expression of the grace of God, becomes foundational in the divine economy through human action. Human action is the expression of the human spirit, which implies that the human spirit is the locus of communication and serves as a channel for the two-way flow of knowledge. The human spirit, each one of us is as a unique expression of the grace of God. These are the highlights for this paragraph. Human action is the expression of the human spirit, and the human spirit serves as a channel for the two-way flow of knowledge. Understanding that the economy is a uniquely human institution means there is also cognition that the human spirit is where it all begins, and human action is where it becomes manifest. Without human beings, whose nature it is to act purposefully, there would be no economy. So the highlights for that paragraph is that the human spirit is where it all begins. And human beings have a nature to act purposefully. There is a saying, it takes two to tango. That is what the market is. It is the place where the solitary individual becomes a social being. So we're moving through these intermediary potencies. And here we are, here at the market. The market is the place where the solitary individual becomes a social being. By this very broad definition, the interaction of parents with their children could even be considered a market. Although an argument could be forwarded against this line of reasoning, such an argument does not allow this very important point to be made. Therefore, it serves no purpose here. The purpose of this broad definition is to remove the limiting definitions ascribed to the market and to remove the prejudices about the market. So it is a very broad definition of the market. But there's a very important point here, and that is we want to remove the prejudices about the market. The market is where individual human action undergoes reconfiguration into a more social entity. This is part of the dynamics between the act and the transformation. The market is where knowledge flows to and from in a civilization, and it is from this proverbial fountain of knowledge that order emerges. See diagram 2D. So here's the proverbial fountain. It's all part of the transformation process. The market is, so the highlights for this paragraph is that the market is where individual human action undergoes reconfiguration into a more social entity. The market is where knowledge flows to and from in a civilization. So the proverbial fountain of shows this acting and knowing from acting, and then knowing causes you to act, and then act causes you to know, knowing causes you to act. This is the transformation process. And it takes place in the market. The three scientific elements just described, property rights, human action, and the market, are inherent and found in full potential in the divine economy. The fourth element differs slightly from the others because of its very strong ties to time. I'm going to take a drink here because my throat is getting dry. Hope you're doing well if you're here. If you're watching it later, I hope you're doing well whenever you're watching it. We're now going to go to the next paragraph. And that's the fourth element. Capital structure is also foundational. It contains and conveys the knowledge that all things in this world are subject to the law of time. Capital, the means of stretching production beyond the present, is necessarily foundational also. So here are the highlights for that paragraph. Capital structure. contains and conveys the knowledge that all things in this world are subject to the law of time. Most significantly, of all factors in the economy, capital is the most limiting. See if you understand why. Ponder. In the here and now, in the present, we cannot live in the future. That's our limitation. The reason capital is the most limiting is because it is what connects the present and the future in the economy within our limitation. It is constrained by uncertainty, yet its variation or structure determines the transformation that takes place in the economy. Here are the highlights for that paragraph. Most significantly, capital is the most limiting of all factors. The reason capital is the most limiting is because it is what connects the present and the future. Its variation or structure determines the transformation that takes place in the economy. And so the final paragraph in this section, the two-dimensional model, is this. Since capital is the most limiting factor, the movement or advancement of civilization depends heavily upon the structure of capital. This necessitates optimally that the capital structure needs to be a harmonious expression of the market so that it truthfully reflects the will of the people. In the divine economy, fully vested human beings find and share knowledge in the market. Part of that knowledge reflects the importance of time, which becomes manifest in capital and its relevant structure. So the highlights for that paragraph is that the movement or advancement of civilization depends heavily upon the structure of capital. And it's essential that it truthfully reflects the will of the people, and that it reflects the importance of time. And that's then manifest in the capital and its relevant structure. Okay, so those are, okay, we've got David, okay, still listening, wrapping up my mind around the concepts and implications. Okay, so I can go to this right here. Yes, David, I can relate to that. I mean, when I look at the model, it looks simple at the beginning, and it gets increasingly more complex and more beautiful. And it's no matter what you do, you can't wrap your head around it completely. But seeing how it interacts and how powerful all the components are, that's just appreciating that is what we can do best. I don't think we can actually ever I know we can't comprehend it, but knowing it, how, and starting it simple and building from that and seeing how it's all related, that's where the wrapping or your mind around it comes in. And then the appreciation of the beauty and the power and the magnificence and the glory of it is where we really come into contact with it, where we step back and we look at it, we see what its potency is, what its potential is. Yeah, that's what we're doing, and I'm glad that you're taking steps towards understanding what the economy is like. That's and like I we've gotten only to the two-dimensional model. We're going to go deeper next time. And like I said, it's not critical in any regard, in any way, to grasp it. I think just to see it as it really is, and step back and admire it, and appreciate it, and thank God for it, I think is what this is all about. So I'm grateful that you're here. So our goal is to apply economics to our lives right now. That's what we're here. That's what we're here for. That's what we want to know economics about. That's why we want to know about economics, is to learn how to apply it in our lives right now. So based on your reflections, think about some of the actions that you can take. So I forgot to go back to and do this reflections during the paragraphs. So as we talked about the paragraphs, read the content, looked at the diagrams, I wanted to go to this reflection slide and give you a moment to think about what you're looking at. That would have been a better way of doing it, and I apologize I've kind of forgot until right now that was another feature of this presentation. So based on your reflections, think about some of the actions that you can take. It's all about transformation. The goal is to use this knowledge of economics to transform the world around you. So I think there was enough kind of thought-provoking information shared that will enable you to have some moments of reflection and to see what kind of action you can take to transform yourself and to transform the world around you. And that is what the purpose of the divine economy theory is. And hopefully that happened for you. So I hope that you've enjoyed yourself here, and then I'm going to sign off here in a second. Next episode we'll go into the third dimension of that model, and I think we'll be able to finish the model next time and then move on beyond that. But until then, take care of yourself, and I'll see you next time. Well, let's get started. Today's fireside is Chapter 2. The title of that chapter is Divine Economy Model. And we're going to be looking at three sections: the three-dimensional model, the fourth dimension, and the fifth dimension. I believe that you'll find this abstract model building experience very interesting. Once we get started, after each paragraph, I will ask for your comments. Let's see who's here. So we're finished with that, and we're going to now take the next step, which is to go into the audio book. But before we do that, I want you to look at this diagram. Okay, so this is the diagram which is the highest form of the two-dimensional model. And we reached this point at the last audiobook episode. So it'll take a minute for you to kind of digest this, even if you were there for that episode. But we went step by step to get to this point. It's called the modus operandi of the divine economy. And so we're going to be starting at that point in a minute. And I want you to just think about what you're seeing here, reflect on it. It might be different from what you know, or it might be a reminder of what you learned. But anyways, that's where we're going to be starting in a second. So take a look at it. Before we go there, though, I want to come back and speak with you, and I want to make sure that you feel comfortable. I'm doing my best to make this enjoyable for you. So please, when you come, give your comments. Tell us where you're from, why you're interested in economics, what you find interesting about the divine economy theory. Oh, I always take a sip from my Ludwig von Mises Institute mug here. Before we get started, and so we're going to look at where we are right now is we're going to be looking at the three-dimensional model. That's where this ebook, this audio book will pick up right there. So, the three-dimensional model. The next modification of the divine economy model stretches the imagination a little by adding a depth dimension, the third dimension in this model. This can be grasped fairly easily by imagining the modus operandi of the divine economy model given in diagram 2C as submerged in a bowl of water. The water that surrounds and supports the model represents latent and active entrepreneurship. See diagram 2E. So this is a little different from what you just were looking at on modus operandi, because we now have submerged it, and now we have this latent and active entrepreneurship as part of that model. This is now the third dimension. So if you'll think about that for a minute. So I was showing you, this was highlighted. Three-dimensional model. I have to keep checking back on that, make sure I'm on the right page. Okay. The three-dimensional model, it stretches the imagination a little by adding a depth dimension. And that diagram 2C that I was showing you is submerged in a bowl of water, and that water that surrounds and supports the model represents latent and active entrepreneurship. As you can see in this diagram, which is diagram 2E, it says that label of that diagram is that entrepreneurship is the driving force of the divine economy. And so this submersion into this bowl of water represents latent and active entrepreneurship that this model is now within. So now go to the next paragraph. When entrepreneurship is wait, no, I'm at the wrong place. Darn it, did I get that? Entrepreneurship is alertness to one's surroundings and the knowledge therein. This is nearly perfectly represented by the submersion analogy. The water is what surrounds, and submersion into the water introduces entrepreneurship. So one's surroundings. The water is what surrounds one's surroundings, and submission into the water introduces entrepreneurship. In this entrepreneurial condition, all that is within, the knowledge therein, potentially comes to light. So the highlights for this paragraph is that entrepreneurship is alertness to one's surroundings and the knowledge therein. And so the knowledge therein potentially comes to light when within this latent and active entrepreneurship. It's this entrepreneurial condition that enables that to happen. I'm fumbling around here, I apologize. So let's see who's here. Next paragraph. Okay. When entrepreneurship is in the latent state, the divine economy and its components are in potential only. When alertness triggers a response, the result is active entrepreneurship, which significantly is the driving force in the economy. So when entrepreneurship is in its latent state, these are the highlights for that paragraph, all the components of the divine economy are in potential only. But when there's this alertness that takes place as part of entrepreneurship, it triggers active entrepreneurship. And that is what is the driving force of the economy. If I am in a latent state of entrepreneurship, I may simply buy a product that I like. Or I may begin to actively perceive opportunities and compare and contrast to see what other products are out there to buy or sell. Additionally, I may look at the time horizon. I may weigh the various possibilities and decide to save so that I can buy a tractor because of the prospect of improved production, for example. So the highlights for this paragraph are that I could be latent, or I could start to become an active entrepreneur by comparing and contrasting, and then also looking at the time horizon, deciding to save so I can do something that would increase production. The next paragraph. As an active entrepreneur, I may discover discrepancies in the market that lead to inefficiencies, and I may take steps to remedy the situation. When in a latent state, the water merely holds within it the divine economy. But when there is active entrepreneurship, energy is released, which charges all the elements in the water. So when there is active entrepreneurship, there's the discrepancies in the market are discovered, and steps are taken to remedy whatever situation there is. And when that happens, energy is released, which charges all the elements in the water. The entire model is charged by that. So I think we're going to look at the next section, which is the fourth dimension. And so to put it into perspective, chapter 2, where we looked at the third dimension, which was submerging the model into water, finding this latent and active entrepreneurship. And now we're going to look at the fourth dimension. The fourth dimension of the divine economy model enters into the picture by identifying its poles. The divine economy has many components, just like the complex system of the planet Earth, which has numerous components such as the water cycle, the ocean currents, the atmospheric forces, geothermal forces, and absorption of solar radiation, to name a few. The Earth also can be understood more fully by examining these factors, as they are influenced by rotation around its poles. So the highlights for this section is we're looking at the fourth dimension, and how that is introduced into the model is the identifying its poles. And the analogy is the complex system of the planet Earth, which has all of these forces taking place in and around the planet, and how those are influenced by the rotation, how examining these factors as they are influenced by the rotation around its poles. That way you can it can be more fully understood. And so that's what we're going to do with the divine economy model. And look at the next paragraph. Similarly, the divine economy can be more fully understood when the model includes the poles of unity and justice. And that's seen in diagram 2F. It is around these two poles that the divine economy revolves. The axis of these poles represents the nature and role of knowledge. The implication here, with this axis being centrally located within the model, is that knowledge flows throughout, and that it is this free-flowing knowledge that best serves all of the divine economy processes. So we're going to look at these are the highlights for that paragraph. We're going to be paying attention to the poles of unity and justice. And the axis of these poles represents the nature and role of knowledge. And this axis is centrally located within the model, and that indicates and is representative that the knowledge flows throughout, and that it is the free-flowing knowledge that best serves all of the divine economy processes. So you see this spinning and centrally located and dispersing this knowledge. And so that is the fourth dimension of the model, by adding this axis showing the nature and role of knowledge. And what that enables us to achieve is to get to what is called the complete divine economy model, independent of time. So this is a snapshot of the divine economy. Even though visually, these little things that's spinning around infinitely fast and knowledge is flowing, it still is, and which indicates that it's dynamic. It's still independent of time. So it's actually a static model, even though it has that dynamic nature to it. Just by looking at it, you can see how dynamic it is. Okay, so we're going to now go to the next paragraph. This is a key concept in the divine economy theory. It is the nature and role of knowledge that enables the equilibrium forces to maintain balance and harmony. Intervention by those with finite human understanding strikes at the nature and role of knowledge axis, with the consequences being a condition of imbalance and disharmony and a corruption of the divine economy. So this is a key concept in the divine economy theory. This nature and role of knowledge axis here enables equilibrium forces to maintain balance and harmony. Intervention strikes at the nature and role of knowledge axis. And the consequences is an imbalance and disharmony and corruption of the divine economy. To clarify the importance of justice, because we're talking about these two poles, unity and justice. To clarify the importance of justice, it is justice that inextricably links the interest of the individual and those of society. Justice also implies non-violence and non-coercion. Oh, so did I? Yeah. So we want to talk about the highlight for this paragraph is we want to talk about the importance of justice. And here's what justice does. It links the interests of the individual and those of society. Elaborating on the pole of unity, the pole of unity shines with prosperity for all. There is now an awareness of the historical and scientific knowledge that shows all humanity as one people. As far back as A.D. 1573, Bartolome de Albornoz wrote, "Buying and selling is the nerve of human life that sustains the universe. By means of buying and selling, the world is united, joining distant lands and nations, people of different languages, laws, and ways of life." So now we're going to address that other pole, the pole of unity. It shines with prosperity for all. By means of buying and selling, the world is united, joining distant lands and nations, people of different languages, laws, and ways of life. So what's happening now is we're about to go to the fifth dimension. I want to remind you of the sequence of steps we've taken. So we started off with the highest form of the two-dimensional model. That's what we covered up to last time. So then we went in and we looked at the third-dimensional model, three-dimensional model. Then we looked at the fourth dimension, and now we're about to look at the fifth dimension of the divine economy model. The fifth dimension of the divine economy model brings in the realism of time, since there is no realism to any economic model that is static. The dynamism of all of the elements of the model comes to life as changes take place over time, and that's shown in diagram 2G, which is this here. So we're moving in time. So the divine economy model moves along in time, and that is the complete divine economy model over time. So the highlights for that, for where we are now, is we're looking at the fifth dimension, and it brings in the realism of time, since there is no realism to any economic model that's static. So the dynamism of all the elements in that model, they're all dynamic within themselves, but over time, that's what when it shows those changes that take place over time, that's what makes it a dynamic model rather than a static model. And so what you'll see here is, see all these elements, they're all happening constantly within their own little circle, yet they're also contributing. It's all interactive. Everything's, when that changes, that changes. When that changes, that changes. So there's always happening like that. And that's what's happening all the time. And then not only that, it's doing that over time. So that's the dynamic nature of the five-dimensional model. Now that the complete model of the divine economy is defined, we are ready to examine economic production. The divine economy model is conducive to the graphical and conceptual exploration of production possibility frontiers, as you will find out in the next chapter. So our journey is just beginning, because now that we have a model, we can actually put it to use and understand all the economic concepts out there with the model that we have in hand. So the divine economy model is conducive to the graphical and conceptual exploration of production possibilities frontiers. That's going to be where we go next, but we'll just continue to hit those economic concepts and put the model into place and look at it, and it'll show you things in ways that you've never seen before. Just like this model is something you've never seen before, and you'll understand everything more as a result. So what I want you to think about now, we're going to, I keep forgetting to use this little slide here. After each paragraph, you could reflect on what you've learned. And so now I'm kind of dumping a load on you, because I'm asking you to reflect on the third dimension, the fourth dimension, and the fifth dimension, and the model as a whole from its very beginning. And because right now we're about to look at the questions that appear at the end of chapter 2, and so I want to look at those with you. So what is it that convinces you that the divine economy model is subjective? So there it is. That's the complete divine economy model, and it looks at it actually over time. What is it about that model that convinces you it's a subjective model? And so then the next question, also from what you've learned about the divine economy model, explain how all of the elements in the divine economy model are affected by the equilibrium forces. So all these elements, How are they being affected by the equilibrium forces? How are they interacting with each other? How's all this changing and moving and responding? Explain how all of the elements in the divine economy model are affected by the equilibrium forces. So what we're going to do now is go back to the agenda. So here is the goal. Our goal is to apply economics to our lives right now. So based on your reflections that you've had through each of these paragraphs, I've tried to help with those with the highlighting of certain points. Based on your reflections, the ones that you've had as a result of listening to this audiobook, think about some action that you can take. It's all about transformation. The goal is to use this knowledge of economics to transform the world around you. So wherever you are, whether you're at the beginning of your understanding of economics, or you have a vast amount of knowledge of economics, but if that's the case, you're still new to this because this is brand new. But it will stimulate your thoughts no matter where you're coming from, and that should be able to be translated into action. You should find that transformation enjoyable, and it should help you make the world a better place. And that's the purpose of the divine economy theory. And that's the purpose of this audiobook that we're going through. The first book, which is More Than Laissez-Faire, which is the macroeconomics book. Anyways, like it said at the end of chapter 2, we're about to go into a new chapter, and that one we're going to look at production possibilities frontiers. And we'll be doing that with our new knowledge that we've gained from the chapter 2, which is the divine economy model. And so I'm going to sign out here in a second, but before I do, I want to come to you in person and thank you for coming. Thank you for, whether you're here live or whether you come back later and listen to the recording, I want to thank you. I hope that I'm doing you a service, and I'm grateful for your interest. So until the next time, which will probably be about a week from now, when I do the next Facebook Live on production possibilities frontiers, within the umbrella, under the umbrella of the divine economy theory. I will see you then.